Please welcome Congressman Emanuel Cleaver II.
Good evening. As the member of Congress representing Independence, Missouri, Harry Truman's home, I've spent a lot of time over the years just thinking about President Truman's legacy. When people think about Harry Truman, some remember his defense of democracy. Some remember his fair deal in the face of economic uncertainty. Tonight, we'll all remember his humanity in the face of discrimination. And when I think of Harry Truman, I'm also reminded of Joe Biden, who joins us here tonight. Well, when I think about Harry Truman, I'm reminded that there are a lot of similarities. Both men came from working class backgrounds, and they used grit and determination to ascend to the presidency. They were drawn to public service not by ego, but the need to go. They swore their oaths as Americans, and they lived as Americans. During their time, mothers, fathers, sons, and daughters found themselves in a global war. Now, generations may divide, but decency unites Truman and Biden. President Biden's commitment to the working class, affordable education, and social equality embodies President Truman's view of the fair deal, and it calls us to build back better. Never heard that term before. I'm creative. Reading today's newspaper will no doubt remind us that President Truman's wisdom is needed as much today as it was in 1947. Too often, my colleagues turn to Scripture without realizing their own hypocrisy. Blessed are the poor in spirit, unless they need some income assistance. Blessed are those who mourn, unless they are saying Black Lives Matter. Blessed are the meek, unless they're gay, trans, female, black, or brown. Blessed be the leader whose spirit can do both things. Thank you for joining us tonight. When I think about this short program tonight and the president being here with us, it reminds me of my grandpa. Almost anything will. And my grandpa was a great preacher, and he would have his grandchildren sitting in front, and he had a cane. So we knew what that meant. And one Sunday, Grandpa stood up, as he did every Sunday, for the offering. And the ushers came down, got the plates. Many of you who are in Protestant churches, you've seen it. They go out and pass the tray. And they brought the tray down to the front for the blessing of the offering. And Grandpa said, "Get it out of here." And everybody looked quizzical. I said, "Get it out of here. Get those plates out of here right now." And so they turned around to leave, and one of them had enough gumption. He turned around and said, "Pastor Cleaver, why do you want us to get it out of here?" He said, "Because it's tainted. This is a tainted offering." And they said, "What do you mean it's tainted?" He said, "It tain't enough." President Truman and President Biden realized it tain't enough to just go into the Oval Office. You got to do something. Jim Clyburn, my friend, realized that it tain't enough to just get oneself elected. have to help get somebody else elected. And so remember, Truman, Biden, can't enough.
Thank you. Thank you very much. I hope I'm enough. Good evening to all of you, and thank you for joining us as we gather to celebrate the civil rights legacy of the 33rd President of these United States. I've spent a great deal of my 30-plus years in Congress reflecting upon the consequences of Harry Truman's presidency and its impact on our nation's pursuit of a more perfect union. President Truman's heritage would suggest that he would be an unlikely champion for civil rights. He grew up in a segregated town in Missouri, in a family of slave owners, and among friends who were adherents to white supremacy. But when he learned of the fate that had befallen Sergeant Isaac Woodard, Jr., a decorated Black World War II veteran who, upon being honorably discharged, was traveling home to Winnsboro, South Carolina, President Truman experienced a Saul to Paul transformation. Sergeant Woodard, while proudly wearing his uniform, adorned with combat ribbons, had been brutally attacked and intentionally blinded by police officers in Batesburg, South Carolina. When he heard of the incident, President Truman is reported to have exclaimed, "My God, I had no idea it was as terrible as that. We have got to do something." He followed that explanation by stepping outside his comfort zone and becoming the first president to address the National Conference of the NAACP, signing Executive Orders 9980 and 9981, which desegregated the armed forces and the federal workforce, and appointing the first federal commission to address the issue of equal treatment and fair play. In short, he shaped a more perfect union. Tonight, 75 years and 13 administrations later, we are honored to have with us another president who is not afraid to step outside of his comfort zone. Not unlike Truman, our 46th president, Joseph Robinette Biden, is constantly underestimated by the pundit class. According to them, he could not win the presidencies. The headlines were not all that different from that iconic headline, "Dewey defeats Truman," in the November 3rd, 1948 edition of the Chicago Tribune. Like Truman, Joe Biden has proved the naysayers wrong. When he came into office, prognosticators opined that it would take years to regain the jobs and economic footing lost during the once-in-a-century coronavirus pandemic, and an inept response. President Biden responded with the American Rescue Plan that put shots in arms, reopened schools, and cut child poverty in half. It spurred an historic and equitable economic recovery. The bipartisan infrastructure law that provides long overdue funding to repair roads and bridges, provide much needed public transit and high-speed rail, makes the largest investment in clean drinking water in American history, and help ensure every American has access to affordable, high-speed internet. The CHIPS and Science Act that is bringing semiconductor manufacturing back to American soil and creating regional tech hubs to ensure Silicon Valley's prosperity will be shared across the country. The Inflation Reduction Act, which includes historic investment in clean energy manufacturing and takes on Big Pharma to bring the cost of insulin and other prescription drugs down. The Safer Communities Act, to tighten the loopholes in background checks for firearm purchases and break the cycle of violence through crime prevention and mental health treatment investments. The PACT Act upholds our sacred commitment to our veterans by expanding health care screenings, assistance for Iraq and Afghanistan veterans, and surviving families impacted by toxic exposure. The PACT Act, thank you. But the PACT Act does something else. It went back and grabbed those Vietnam veterans who did not get proper assessments and I've talked to several in my congressional district who said to me that when the PACT Act passed, their benefits went from 15 and 20% up to 95 and 100%. Now, President Biden was doing all of this while implementing $116 million in student loan debt forgiveness for 3.4 million borrowers and bending the long arc of the moral universe toward justice by fulfilling a campaign promise that shocked the prognosticators when he made it, putting the first black woman on our highest court in the country. President Biden has repeatedly stepped outside of his comfort zone and delivered for the American people. Because of his wisdom, courage, and determination, unemployment is at a 50-year low. $13.2 million new jobs have been created, and consumer confidence is high and rising. For the first time in generations, we are bringing manufacturing jobs back to America, and last month, the economy grew 2.4%, exceeding expectations, and inflation dropped to 3%. In short, Bidenomics is working. And the American people are beginning to respond. Because of his temperament, temerity, and tenaciousness, Joe Biden has restored our nation's preeminence around the world and rejuvenated the American people. Ladies and gentlemen, it is my great honor to present the 46th President of the United States of America, Joe Biden.
be seated. You know, I had an opportunity to meet members of the Truman board, and we're talking about all that Harry Truman did. And I was reminded, and I'm going to send the Truman Library a copy of it. My grandpa was an Irishman named Ambrose Finnegan, and I lived in Scranton till the economy just drew down and there was no work. My dad was a salesperson, and we moved down to Delaware, Claremont, Delaware. We go home all the time to Scranton, and one day we went back. I was back in Scranton, and a lot of my friends. I moved there to Delaware when I was in 3rd grade, but we've been home a lot. We still call Scranton home, and we were up there on St. Patrick's Day when I was 14 years old, and I was standing on the corner watching everybody go by to go into the event, and Harry Truman was a speaker at the Truman dinner that year. And the sort of the David Broder of the Scranton Times was a guy named Tommy Phillips, who was a elderly man, younger than me, but elderly man, who was the chief political reporter. And they got a picture, and I hadn't thought about it in a long time, but I'll send it over to the library, of me at 14 years old standing in the corner, and it was a warm day for February. And I'm standing in the corner in a long-sleeve shirt with my buddies. And President Truman was coming around the corner, coming off of Dimmock Avenue, and he was in a convertible. And purely by accident, I assume it was an accident, the photographer from the newspaper got a picture of me making eye contact with Harry Truman. It was just, I'm sure a lot of people made eye contact with him. But I was looking, and you can see in the photograph, we're looking at one another eye to eye. And that's when this Tommy Phillips, the David Broder of the day in Scranton, wrote, "That's when Joe Biden knew he was going to be president." I knew I was going to be president when Jim Clyburn went ahead and endorsed me. That's when I knew I was going to be president. Thank you, Jim. This is a great honor to be here tonight, and I mean that sincerely. Summer 1918, First World War. Train moves through the outskirts of Paris. An American Army captain rides alongside an all-white regiment heading to the front lines. The son of a slave state, the grandson of slave owners, Captain Harry S. Truman, looks through his glasses toward the blood-stained soil of the Second Battle of the Marne that ended just a few months before. It was a pivotal victory that led by the vital part of America's 369th Infantry Regiment, the Harlem Hellfighters, an all-black regiment that spent 191 days on the front, longer than any unit of its size in history. A link in a distinguished line of ancestors and descendants, enslaved and free, risking their lives in every war since our founding for ideals they hadn't fully known on American soil, equality and freedom. A fearless captain on a consecrated battlefield in a segregated military, a snapshot in time of the work of all time to redeem the soul of America, which we're still struggling to do. Representatives Clyburn and Cleaver, the Truman families and leader of the Truman Institute, distinguished guests, my fellow Americans, I speak to you tonight, not from a battlefield, but from another sacred place, the National Archives, home of timeless words that point to our North Star, a light for the dreams and the pains of centuries of enslaved people in America. An idea, once the most simple and the most powerful idea in the history of the world, that we're all created equal, endowed by our Creator with certain inalienable rights, and deserve to be treated with equality, not just at the beginning, but throughout our lives. A covenant covenant we made with each other so central to who we are that we enshrined it in our Declaration of Independence. We hold these truths to be self-evident. Our Constitution, we the people. Our Bill of Rights, with the freedom of religion, speech, press, assembly, and more, all safeguarded in this hallowed place. History requires us to acknowledge that we've never fully lived up to the promise of America, captured in the essence of these documents. But our aspiration is to be a more perfect union, ensure that we never fully walked away from it either. Just like the Army captain who became President of the United States of America walked toward our North Star when he signed the executive order, as Jim mentioned, 9981, that desegregated the United States Armed Forces on July 26, 1948, 75 years as of yesterday. Harry Truman, born in Missouri, to a family and community that embraced the Confederate sympathies. But savage violence and venom toward black veterans and the power of the civil rights movement changed his mind and his heart. Guided by a prayer he memorized as a child, and the prayer went like this: "O Almighty and everlasting God, creator of heaven, earth, and universe, help me to be, to think, to act what is right because it is right." That was the prayer he memorized, and history says he spoke to. When the time came, Harry Truman did what the very American thing. He rose to the occasion, and he chose to do right. The American military has been segregated since our founding. Yet hundreds of thousands of people of color, men and women, still courageously served with love of country that often didn't love them back. They served in our Revolutionary War, declaring independence from a king, only to be enslaved by a master. They protected the Union in the Civil War, only to face disunion under Jim Crow. They sacrificed during 2 world wars, fighting against autocracy, only to be denied the freedom of their own democracy. They're patriots like the Buffalo Soldiers, legends for their valor in combat. The Tuskegee Airmen, flying more than 15,000 sorties in the battle. Native Americans serving in our military at the highest rate of any demographic and nearly 5 times the national average. Hispanic Americans, like those of the 65th Regiment, Infantry Regiment, helping liberate a Nazi concentration camp and protect Allied roads and airfields and posts. Asian Americans, Native Hawaiians, Pacific Islanders, like the 442nd Regimental Combat Team, liberating Europe, a team that included one of my dearest and closest friends and a mentor of mine when I got here as a 29-year-old kid, the late Senator Danny Inouye, who served in the Senate with another friend, a great Hawaiian veteran, the late Senator Daniel Akaka. The list goes on, including rank-and-file cooks, custodians, secretaries, mailmen, too often overlooked and forgotten, but made it work. Yet, when these veterans came home, they were still denied equal opportunity in housing, education, jobs, even marriage. Families held in incarceration camps. Many of them denied the benefits of the GI Bill because the states put up barriers to be able to collect that GI benefit. And targeted and racist violence that was callous and all too often casual and common. Let me take you back to 1946. Jim already spoke to this. February, South Carolina. Sergeant Isaac Woodard, a decorated black World War II veteran, saw 3 years of war in the Pacific. Returning home to finally see his family, he asked the bus driver to stop so he could use the restroom. Instead, the driver called the police. On arrival, the cops pulled him off the bus while he was still in uniform. Beat him so badly they permanently blinded him. Beat him so badly they blinded him. And he was in his uniform. I'm still astounded by the cruelty and viciousness. Sergeant Woodard reunited with his family, but he could never look into their eyes again. 5 months later, July in Georgia, Army veteran George Dorsey, who spent 5 years in the Pacific, home with his wife for just 10 months. They were driving with his brother-in-law and sister, who was 7 months pregnant, when a white mob attacked them, pulled them from their car, and fired 60 shots, 60 shots at close range, leaving their bodies barely identifiable. My God, how sick. It's unbelievable what racism, fueled by ignorance, can unleash in this country. The next month, August 1946, in response to similar acts of racist terror, a 17-year-old college student wrote a letter to the Atlantic Constitution. Here's what he said. He said, quote, "We want and are entitled to the basic rights and opportunities of every American citizen," end of quote. That was a college student at Morehouse College. His name was Martin Luther King, Jr. But a young king wasn't the only person awakened. A president was awakened as well. Harry Truman felt a moral imperative to respond to the mistreatment of black veterans. He heard their calls for a double victory, to win freedom abroad and at home. He felt the urgency from civil rights leaders like A. Philip Randolph and the NAACP. An unlikely character in the civil rights story of America, Harry Truman set his sights on our North Star. He created the President's Commission on Civil Rights and issued the groundbreaking report entitled, "To Secure These Rights." That was entitled, "To Secure These Rights," condemning segregation and outlining, I should say, changes in law and policy, protecting the right to vote, prohibiting discrimination in jobs and transportation, desegregating the military, and much more. But as you might guess, the backlash was instant. A friend wrote to him pleading to change course. But President Truman wrote back, quote, "I'm asking for equality of opportunity for all human beings. And as long as I stay here, I'm going to continue to fight," end of quote. Members of his own party, members of the military, rejected his civil rights agenda. Undeterred, Harry Truman acted. And we're a much better nation for his courage and commitment, and for the sacrifice and service of all our patriots who fought for our democracy. This year commemorates two other significant milestones: the 75th anniversary of women in the military and the 50th anniversary of an all-volunteer force. And as Commander-in-Chief, I'm honored to oversee the greatest fighting force, literally, not figuratively, in the history of the world, and that's not hyperbole. And I might add, the most diverse fighting force in the history of the world. And folks, these two points are not unrelated. More than 40% of our active duty force are people of color. 40%. About 20% are women, up from just 2% in 1948. A fighting immigrant force and those native born, hailing from big cities, suburbs, small towns, tribal communities. As our military became more diverse, it became stronger, tougher, and more capable. Proving our diversity is a strength, not a weakness, a necessary part of our warfighting, our deterrence, and our successful military operations. And our unity, out of many, not division, ensures good order and discipline, unit cohesion, effectiveness, and military readiness. We've seen it with generations of patriots, regardless of who they are mentored by and trained by, fellow servicemen from every background, like my friend, the late Colin Powell, and he was a friend. Like so many veterans, I've had the privilege to award our nation's highest honors, working toward the same mission, forming lifelong friendships, returning home to put on civilian clothes and enrich every part of American life. Bonding through a deep love of our nation that draws our greatest strengths and our greatest strategic assets, the full talents of all the American people. And I mean that, think about it, the full of all the American people. Some of you are tired of hearing me saying, but I've been said for many years. We have many obligations as a government. We only have one truly sacred obligation: to prepare and equip those we send into harm's way and care for them and their families when they come home and when they don't. For me and my wife, Jill, for our family, it's personal, like many of you. Among the most important duties Jill and I have stood at Arlington to undertake the right of remembrance, so we have back home, and as we have back home in Delaware for our son, Major Bo Biden, Bronze Star, Conspicuous Service Medal. In fact, Jill couldn't be here tonight because she just returned from Europe, where she paid her respects at the Brittany American Cemetery, the final resting place of thousands of Americans, World War II troops. It matters to Vice President Harris and our entire administration. It matters that we have the best leaders to lead the best force in the world that represent our entire country. From my perspective, that's America. That's America. It includes the first ever black Secretary of Defense who wanted to be here tonight, but he's traveling to the Indo-Pacific to strengthen our security ties in the region. Secretary Lloyd Austin, a decorated former four-star general. A war fighter with more than 40 years of service, embodying the very spirit of why we're here tonight. There's Deputy Defense Secretary Kathleen Hicks, a prodigious scholar and leader, the first woman confirmed as Deputy Secretary of Defense. I also got confirmed 2 four-star generals that lead our combatant commands, second and third women in the history to do so. It matters. But something dangerous is happening. I've worked across the aisle my entire career. I think my colleagues will attest to that. I have good friends who are Republicans. We disagree. A guy I disagree like the devil with, but is a decent and honorable man and does what he says, is a Republican leader in the Senate. We disagree on almost everything. The Republican Party used to always support the military. But today, they're undermining the military. The senior senator from Alabama, who claims to support our troops, is now blocking more than 300 military operations with his extreme political agenda. Like General C.Q. Brown, F-16 pilot and a wing commander, the first African-American to lead any branch of the armed service, to be the next chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff. That's who I've nominated. He's waiting. Admiral Lisa Franchetti, the second woman in our Navy ever to achieve the rank of four-star admiral, who I chose to make history again as the first woman as Chief of Naval Operations. I've also nominated other outstanding leaders of all backgrounds. We need them. Right now, tens of thousands of America's daughters and sons are deployed around the world tonight, keeping us safe from immense national security challenges. But the senator from Alabama is not. For the first time in more than 100 years, we don't have a sitting confirmed commandant of the Marine Corps. By the fall, we may not have a chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff. We may not have a military leaders for our Army and Navy either. This partisan freeze is already harming military readiness, security leadership, and troop morale. Freezing pay, freezing people in place. Military families already sacrificed so much, unsure of where or when they change stations, unable to get housing or start their kids in the new school because they're not there yet. Military spouses forced to take critical career decisions, not knowing where or if they can apply for a new job. A growing cascade of damage and disruption, all because one senator from Alabama and 48 Republicans who refused to stand up to him to lift the blockade over the Pentagon policy offering servicemen and women, their families, access to reproductive health care rights they deserve if they're stationed in states that deny it. I think it's outrageous, but don't just take it from me. Hundreds of military spouses petitioned to end the extreme blockade. One spouse, referencing Senator from Alabama, said, quote, "This isn't a football game. This nonsense must..." Enough. It's time for the Senate to confirm the next chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, the next commandant of the Marine Corps. It's time for service members to receive the pay and promotions they've earned and deserve. It's time for the Senate of Alabama to let these generals and admirals fully serve their country and service members care for themselves and their families. I urge Senate Republicans to do what they know is right, keep our country safe like Harry Truman. Approve all those outstanding military nominees now, now, now. Which was routine in the past, I might add. And enough of the attacks on our military. From those voices slandering the American military, saying it's becoming weak, soft, and less capable. We hear it from the senior senator from Missouri, who held his fist high and saluted January 6th, even as veterans turned, police officers protected him and our nation, as insurrectionists held a dagger at the throat of democracy. We hear it from the junior senator from Texas, who fell for Russian propaganda suggesting that their military, the Russian military, is better than ours, calling our military emasculated. Where the hell? Sorry. Frankly, they have no idea in what God's name they're talking about. As Commander-in-Chief, I can tell you without reservation, not just being in this business for a long time, but being a student of history, we have and always will have the strongest, toughest fighting force in the history of the world. And again, that's not hyperbole. That's real. I'm sorry to go on, but as my grandpa would say, this gets my goat. Let me close with this. In June of 1865, a major general from the Union Army arrived in Galveston, Texas, to enforce the Emancipation Proclamation and free the last enslaved Americans from bondage. Juneteenth, a day that reflects the psalm, what the psalm tells us. Quote, weeping may endure for a night, but joy cometh in the morning. Last month, 2 years after I made Juneteenth a federal holiday, the first new federal holiday since Dr. Martin Luther King Day, nearly 40 years ago, I hosted a Juneteenth Congress at the White House, the beacon of our republic, I might add, built by enslaved people. Watching their descendants, students, dancers, singers perform in that lawn of the White House was spiritual. To think, thousands of black Union soldiers killed during the Civil War. Think, enslaved people remained shackled 2 years after emancipation. To think how many long nights they looked to the light and the North Star to keep the faith that despite Americans' original sin of slavery, this nation could be saved. That is patriotism. That's patriotism. During that powerful concert, we heard the great Jennifer Hudson sing from her soul about the glory that will come and echo an anthem of a movement. I can't sing, so I'm not even going to try. But I'll quote, it's been a long time coming, but I know a change is going to come. Oh, yes, it will. That's what happened 75 years ago when an American president chose to do right. And that's what we commemorate tonight. A forward march in our own lives and the life of the nation toward the North Star, the idea of America that beats in the heart of all of our people. I know we'll do this. I've never been more optimistic about America's future. Let us reflect and repair. Let us rise to the occasion and redeem the soul of this nation. Treat each other with decency and respect. Change the dialogue. Let's remember who in God's name we are. We're the United States of America. And there's nothing, think about this, literally, there's nothing we've ever set our mind to we haven't accomplished. Nothing, ever, if we decided we're going to do it. Nothing beyond our capacity when we act together. So let's reach out even to those who have less than generous. Try to pull them in so we can act together. And I mean this from the bottom of my heart. May God bless you all. May God protect our troops.